There are moments in history when the ground beneath a culture shifts so violently that everything once believed to be solid begins to crack. Every society builds its identity upon a story and origin, a purpose, a sense of direction. For centuries in the Western world, that story was inherited rather than created. People believed in a fixed moral order, a divine structure, a cosmic design in which every individual had a place. But Friedrich Nietzsche, observing the modern world with unsettling clarity, saw that this inherited story was beginning to crumble. And when a story collapses, meaning collapses with it, what remains is a silent landscape of uncertainty, a void. A question with no answer. This void is where nihilism emerges. Nihilism is not simply the belief that life has no meaning. It is the recognition that the meanings we inherited no longer hold their power. It is the moment when traditional anchors religion, morality, cultural norms, institutions lose their authority over our lives. Nietzsche did not invent nihilism. He diagnosed it. He saw it approaching like a dark storm in the distance, growing larger with every generation. And he believed the modern world was completely unprepared for what was coming. To understand nihilism, Nietzsche insisted we look beyond slogans or pessimistic cliches. Nihilism is a cultural earthquake. It is what happens when people still desire meaning, purpose, and direction, but have lost the beliefs that once provided it. Modern individuals continue to hunger for certainty. Yet the old sources of certainty, faith, tradition, inherited morality, no longer satisfy. The result is a deep feeling of inner tension, the desire for meaning. Without a clear path to find it, the roots of this crisis stretch far into history. For centuries, Western civilization was shaped by a belief in a higher order, a divine plan that gave structure to human life. Morality was thought to be absolute, written into the universe. But as science advanced and philosophical skepticism increased, doubt crept into this worldview. Nietzsche observed that people continued to behave as though old values were still binding, even when they no longer believed in their foundations. This, he argued, created a strange hypocrisy, a culture living off borrowed values that had already lost their meaning. The famous declaration that God is dead was not a celebration. It was a diagnosis. Nietzsche meant that the idea of God, the cultural foundation of Nietzsche's morality and meaning, had lost its authority in the minds of modern people. Society was entering a new age where the old framework no longer guided human life. Removing that foundation without replacing it leaves a cultural vacuum. And nature, as Nietzsche knew, abhors a vacuum. In this vacuum, people begin to feel untethered. Traditions that once shaped identity start to feel arbitrary. Laws and social expectations begin to feel like empty rituals. Even aspirations, career goals, social roles. Personal achievements lose their shine when stripped of the larger story that once gave them significance. People may still pursue success, but it no longer satisfies in the same way. They may still cling to moral rules, but the conviction behind them grows weaker. Nihilism begins quietly. It starts as a faint suspicion that the world is not guided by a clear purpose. It grows into a doubt about whether life has any intrinsic meaning at all. For Nietzsche, this doubt was not only an intellectual issue, but a psychological crisis. When meaning collapses, the human spirit collapses with it. Individuals who once felt connected to something larger now feel isolated. The world becomes fragmented. People retreat into distraction, entertainment, or ideology to escape the uncomfortable truth that their lives no longer feel. Rooted in anything enduring, Nietzsche saw signs of this crisis everywhere in the culture of his time. He saw it in the growing distrust of institutions, in the rise of aimlessness, in the explosion of mass movements that promised certainty to people who were terrified of freedom. He believed society was preparing for a dramatic shift, the transition from an age of belief to an age of doubt. And this transition would not be smooth. It would be filled with confusion, conflict, and cultural upheaval. At first, many people respond to nihilism with denial. They cling more tightly to old beliefs, hoping that repetition will restore their power. Others react with fear, trying to suppress or ignore the growing sense that meaning is slipping away. Still others embrace nihilism passively, sinking into apathy or distraction. But Nietzsche believed these responses only delay the inevitable. The old meanings will not return just because we want them to. Humanity must face the crisis directly. Nihilism is not merely a philosophical idea. It is a psychological storm. It affects the way people see themselves, their relationships, their ambitions, and their future. When meaning collapses, individuals can feel lost, even when everything in their life appears stable. They may feel an inner emptiness that cannot be filled by material success or social approval. They may experience a drifting sensation, as though life moves but does not progress. This crisis is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet and internal, expressed through a subtle sense of disconnection from one's own life. Nietzsche believed that the rise of nihilism was not a sign of cultural failure, but a sign of transition. It meant that humanity had outgrown its old values, but had not yet developed new ones. The old world was dying, and a new one had not yet been created. This in-between stage is unsettling, but it is also fertile. Without the collapse of old values, new values cannot emerge. Without the recognition that inherited beliefs no longer hold power, individuals cannot begin the difficult task of creating meaning for themselves. In Nietzsche's view, nihilism is the unavoidable consequence of intellectual honesty. Once people begin questioning why they believe what they believe, the old answers no longer satisfy. Once science challenges traditional explanations, certainty fades. Once individuals demand personal authenticity, inherited values feel imposed rather than chosen. For Nietzsche, this process is the natural result of human development. As societies become more aware, more educated, and more self-reflective, old beliefs lose their authority, but intellectual development alone does not resolve the crisis. Knowledge can dismantle old values, but it cannot automatically create new ones. This is the heart of nihilism, the growing gap between the destruction of old meaning and the creation of new meaning. Nietzsche feared that many would respond to this gap by retreating into comfort, conformity, or escapism. He warned that people might turn to ideologies, political movements, or rigid belief systems not because they truly believed in them, but because these systems offer temporary relief from uncertainty. This desperate search for certainty creates its own dangers. When people lose personal meaning, they become vulnerable to collective movements that promise simple answers. Nietzsche believed that the rise of mass culture, what he described as the herd mentality, was a response to nihilism. People afraid of freedom seek safety in the group. They surrender their individuality to avoid the responsibility of creating values for themselves. Yet, Nietzsche also saw another more powerful response to nihilism, the possibility of transformation. When meaning collapses, individuals face a choice. They can surrender to despair, or they can confront the void directly and begin the difficult work of creating new values. This, for Nietzsche, is the path of strength. It requires courage, creativity, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. It requires breaking free from inherited beliefs and learning to stand alone. It requires accepting that meaning is not given, it must be built. The collapse of meaning is frightening, but it also marks the beginning of freedom. Once individuals recognize that their old values were inherited rather than chosen, they gain the ability to shape their own lives. They are no longer constrained by the expectations of the past. They can redefine success, morality, identity, and purpose, according to their own inner vision. This is not an easy path, and Nietzsche never pretended that it was. But he believed it was the only path capable of leading beyond nihilism. From Nietzsche's perspective, the emergence of nihilism in modern society is both a challenge and an opportunity. It is a challenge because it forces individuals to face uncomfortable truths about the foundations of their beliefs. It is an opportunity because it opens the door to new ways of thinking, new values, and new forms of human strength. The collapse of meaning is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new chapter in human development. But before new values can be created, the crisis must be understood. Individuals must recognize how deeply nihilism penetrates modern life. They must see how it shapes their thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. They must acknowledge the slow erosion of meaning that affects not only personal life, but entire cultures. Nietzsche believed that only by confronting nihilism honestly could humanity move forward. Avoiding the crisis only deepens it. Facing the crisis opens the possibility of transformation. Nihilism emerges when the stories that once held a culture together no longer persuade. When individuals inherit values that no longer inspire. When people continue to perform rituals whose meaning they no longer believe. It emerges when the connection between the individual and the world grows thin. When life feels directionless, even in the midst of constant activity. When the search for meaning becomes more urgent precisely because meaning feels absent. There is a particular heaviness that settles on the human spirit when meaning begins to dissolve. It does not arrive suddenly or violently. Instead, it appears gradually, like a dim fog that thickens over time, obscuring the familiar landmarks we once trusted to guide us. This heaviness is the emotional core of nihilism. It is the lived experience of the collapse, described in Part 1, the internal consequences of a world losing its central story. Nietzsche understood that the crisis of nihilism is not merely an intellectual problem. It is a psychological and spiritual struggle that shapes the very texture of everyday life. To recognize the weight of nihilism, one must first understand that humans are meaning-seeking creatures. We orient our lives around purpose, identity, and direction. Even those who claim to reject meaning often unconsciously build their lives around routines, habits, relationships, or ambitions that provide a sense of order. Nietzsche believed that meaning is not an optional luxury, it is a fundamental need. When this need is not met, individuals feel a subtle but persistent emptiness, a sense that something essential is missing. This emptiness does not always express itself through dramatic despair. More often, it appears as a quiet disconnection. Life continues on the surface: work, conversations, responsibilities, but beneath these activities lies a growing sense of unreality. Things feel hollow, actions feel mechanical. The rhythm of daily life becomes a performance without conviction. Nietzsche saw this expression of nihilism everywhere in modern society, in the exhaustion of people who chase goals they no longer believe in the polite but empty rituals of social life, in the disenchanted feeling that progress no longer inspires. Many individuals feel this weight long before they understand its source. They may describe it as burnout, boredom, alienation, or lack of passion. They may feel overwhelmed by options, yet uninterested in any of them. They may feel pressured to succeed but unsure why success matters. Nietzsche believed these experiences were early symptoms of a deeper cultural sickness. The old values provided structure, but once their authority faded, individuals were left without a compass. One of the most profound psychological effects of nihilism is the loss of external validation. For centuries, people were guided by the belief that their actions mattered in the eyes of a higher power, or within a moral order that transcended individual life. This provided not only purpose, but also security. When these structures collapse, individuals must confront the unsettling possibility that there is no external observer guaranteeing that their choices have meaning. They must face the burden of freedom. Freedom, Nietzsche argued, is not automatically liberating. In its raw form, it is heavy and disorienting. It demands responsibility. It removes excuses, forces individuals to confront the truth that meaning is not inherited, but created. Many people are unprepared for this responsibility. They crave the comfort of certainty, even if that certainty is limiting. The absence of external guidance leaves them unsure of who they are or what they should become. This uncertainty often leads to overthinking. People begin questioning everything: career choices, relationships, moral beliefs, personal desires. Without a stable framework, every decision becomes a burden. What once felt obvious now feels arbitrary. The world does not provide answers, and the individual does not know where to search. Nietzsche believed that modern people suffer not from a lack of possibilities, but from a lack of grounding that helps them evaluate those possibilities. Another consequence of nihilism is emotional numbness. When values lose their power, emotions lose their intensity. Joy becomes muted. Achievement feels anticlimactic. The future feels foggy rather than hopeful. People may continue striving, but their efforts lack a clear destination. Nietzsche compared this state to a spiritual anemia. Life continues, but its vitality fades. In this state, individuals often turn to distraction. Modern society makes distraction easier than ever. Entertainment, technology, social validation, and consumerism offer temporary relief from the emptiness. But these distractions do not resolve the crisis. They conceal it. Nietzsche believed that constant stimulation is a symptom of nihilism, not a cure. People distract themselves precisely because they fear confronting the emptiness beneath their lives. Nihilism also affects relationships. When individuals feel disconnected from themselves, they struggle to connect authentically with others. Relationships may become based on convenience, comfort, or habit rather than shared meaning. People may seek validation from others to compensate for their lack of inner purpose, creating dependence or resentment. Nietzsche believed that meaningful relationships require individuals who have first found meaning within themselves. Without this foundation, relationships are fragile, shaped by insecurity rather than strength. Another heavy effect of nihilism is the loss of aspiration. People may want to improve their lives, but without a clear sense of why, aspirations lose their motivational power. Self-improvement becomes a cycle of efforts without direction. Goals are pursued and abandoned repeatedly. The future becomes a concept rather than a destination. Nietzsche believed that a person without a guiding purpose becomes a prisoner of the present moment, trapped in routines rather than driven by vision. Yet one of the most overlooked consequences of nihilism is the rise of cynicism. When people lose belief in grand narratives, they become suspicious of all ideals. They reject ambition as naive, morality as hypocritical, and passion as impractical. Cynicism presents itself as wisdom, but Nietzsche saw it as a symptom of spiritual fatigue. It is easier to dismiss all values than to confront the responsibility of creating new ones. Cynicism becomes a shield that protects individuals from disappointment but also prevents them from meaningful growth. Cynicism often pairs with pessimism, the belief that the world is driven by meaningless forces, that human life is insignificant, that striving is futile. Nietzsche believed pessimism arises when individuals lack the strength to face the truth of nihilism directly. Instead of confronting the void, they declare it the final truth. But pessimism is not clarity, it is surrender. It is the emotional resignation that occurs when people feel too weak to build meaning in a world that no longer provides it. Nietzsche also identified a more subtle form of nihilism, passive nihilism. This occurs when individuals accept the collapse of meaning but do nothing to respond. They drift through life, avoiding deep thought, avoiding commitment, avoiding responsibility. They may not be unhappy, but they are unfulfilled. They survive but do not truly live. Passive nihilism is not a dramatic crisis, but a quiet stagnation, a life without inner drive. But Nietzsche warned of a more dangerous form, active nihilism. This is not the simple acceptance of meaninglessness, but the desire to destroy whatever remains of meaning. Active nihilists tear down values, institutions, and traditions, not to create something new but to deepen the void. They embrace destruction for its own sake. Nietzsche believed active nihilism arises when individuals experience the collapse of meaning as a form of empowerment. They believe that if nothing matters, anything is allowed. But this path leads not to freedom, but to chaos. Nietzsche saw both passive and active nihilism in modern culture. He saw it in political extremism, in cultural fragmentation, in the breakdown of shared values. He believed these phenomena were symptoms of a society caught between the death of old meanings and the birth of new ones. Until new values are created, the crisis will continue. Understanding the weight of nihilism requires recognizing that it is not primarily a belief, but an experience. It is the emotional and psychological state of living without a stable foundation. It affects people differently based on their temperament, background, and personal strength. Some feel it as despair. Others feel it as confusion. Others feel it as restlessness. But beneath these variations lies a common thread, the sense that life lacks a unifying principle. Nietzsche believed that this crisis cannot be resolved by returning to old values. Once people recognize that a belief system has lost its authority, they cannot truly restore their faith in it. Attempts to revive old values often result in dogmatism or fanaticism, not genuine conviction. For Nietzsche, the path forward requires a transformation, not a return. But before transformation can occur, individuals must understand the depth of the crisis. They must recognize the subtle forms of nihilism that shape their thoughts and behaviors. They must confront their own reliance on external validation, their fear of freedom, their tendency to avoid responsibility. They must acknowledge the emptiness they feel without running from it. Believe that only by facing the crisis honestly can individuals begin to overcome it. This confrontation is uncomfortable. It requires introspection. It requires acknowledging truths that many would prefer to ignore. But Nietzsche believed this discomfort is necessary. Only through struggle does strength emerge. Only through the collapse of old values does the possibility of new values arise. The weight of nihilism is heavy because it forces individuals to carry the burden of their own lives. It demands that they create meaning rather than inherit it. To step beyond nihilism, Nietzsche believed one must first understand its power. Nihilism is heavy not because it destroys meaning, but because it exposes the fragility of the meanings we thought were eternal. The crisis strikes at the heart of the human condition. We long for stability, yet the world gives us change. We long for certainty, yet our beliefs are always vulnerable to doubt. The collapse of meaning leaves a profound silence, and in that silence, many feel abandoned. But Nietzsche saw something else within that silence, a possibility. The emptiness left by collapsing values was not simply a void. It was a space that could be filled, a space where new values could be created. This idea, the revaluation of all values, is one of Nietzsche's boldest and most misunderstood concepts. It does not mean rejecting everything or descending into chaos. It means examining our values so deeply that we discover which ones are truly ours and which ones we merely inherited. It means recognizing that many of our moral beliefs were formed under conditions that no longer exist. It means asking whether the values we live by support strength, creativity, and vitality, or whether they inhibit them. To revalue values is not to destroy meaning. It is to rebuild it. Nietzsche believed that most people unknowingly follow values shaped by the past rather than by their own nature. These inherited values may have once served a purpose, but they often become rigid over time. They limit growth. They encourage conformity. They offer safety at the cost of individuality. When culture clings to outdated values, people feel torn between who they are and who they believe they should be. This tension deepens the sense of nihilism. The revaluation of values begins when individuals turn inward and ask the most fundamental questions. Why do I believe this? Why do I value this? Who benefits from this belief? Does this value strengthen me or weaken me? For Nietzsche, this internal questioning is not an act of rebellion, but an act of honesty. It requires courage to confront the possibility that one's deepest beliefs may not be chosen but adopted. It requires strength to discard values that no longer serve one's growth. Many people assume that meaning must come from outside religion, society, tradition, culture. Nietzsche challenged this assumption. He believed that true meaning must arise from within. When individuals discover meaning through introspection, they create values that reflect their unique character rather than the expectations of others. These values become sources of strength because they are rooted in authenticity rather than obedience. But Nietzsche warned that revaluation is not easy. It requires navigating the dangerous territory beyond conventional morality. Those who take this path must face uncertainty without falling into despair. They must question without collapsing into cynicism. They must destroy only what prevents growth, never for the thrill of destruction. The goal is not chaos, but clarity too. Revalue values is to become one's own judge. This does not mean rejecting all moral principles. It means reshaping them through personal insight. A person who revalues values does not become immoral. They become self-directed. They create a moral framework anchored in their own understanding of what fosters life, energy, and flourishing. Instead of asking, "Is this allowed?" they ask, "Does this align with who I aim to become?" Nietzsche believed that values reflect the health of a culture or an individual. When values promote strength, resilience, creativity, and excellence, they elevate the human spirit. When values promote passivity, resentment, mediocrity, or submission, they weaken it. He saw modern society increasingly embracing values rooted in fear. Fear of individuality, fear of ambition. These values encourage people to shrink rather than expand, to conform rather than create. The revaluation of values is therefore also a recovery of courage. It is a shift from seeking comfort to seeking purpose. It is a recognition that meaning requires effort, not because the world withholds meaning, but because meaning must be built through action. Nietzsche often described as two types of people: those who inherit values and those who create them. The former live through habits and expectations. The latter live through vision. The former ask what life offers them. The latter ask what they can make of life. The former follow paths laid by others. The latter carve their own paths through unknown landscapes. Becoming a creator of values does not mean imposing one's values on others. It means shaping one's own life according to principles that arise from deep self-understanding. It means living deliberately rather than reactively. It means forming an internal compass that guides one even when external structures collapse. Revaluation begins with self-examination, but it does not end there. Once individuals clarify their values, they must embody them. Nietzsche believed that values gain power through lived experience. A value that remains an idea is weak. A value that is lived becomes a source of strength. The process of living according to one's values reveals which ones are genuine and which ones are illusions. This stage is challenging because society often resists value creators. People who think for themselves disrupt the comfort of those who follow inherited beliefs. They challenge assumptions. They refuse to conform. They expose the weakness of values sustained only by habit. Nietzsche believed that those who create values must be prepared for misunderstanding, criticism, and isolation. Their path is difficult but necessary, for they carry humanity forward. The call to revalue values is also a call to overcome resentment. Nietzsche considered resentment bitterness toward life or toward others one of the greatest obstacles to human flourishing. Resentment traps individuals in a reactive mindset. They define themselves by what they oppose rather than by what they create. They allow past wounds to determine their future. Revaluation requires releasing resentment so that energy can be redirected toward self-creation rather than self-defense. Nietzsche encouraged individuals to ask not, "Who hurt me?" but "Who can I become?" This shift in focus transforms weakness into strength. It frees the individual from the shadow of past suffering. It opens the possibility of growth. Another crucial element of revaluation is embracing contradictions within oneself. Human nature is complex. It contains rationality and instinct, calmness and passion, order and chaos. Many moral systems demand that individuals suppress parts of themselves to fit into a single mold. Nietzsche believed the suppression contributes to nihilism. When people deny essential aspects of their nature, they become fragmented. Revaluation requires integrating these inner contradictions rather than rejecting them. 2. Integrate oneself is to become whole. When individuals accept all parts of themselves, ambition, vulnerability, strength, desire, they gain the capacity to direct their energy rather than waste it in inner conflict. This integration fosters authenticity, and authenticity fosters meaning. Revaluation is not a single moment, but an ongoing process. Values must be continually examined and refined as life changes. Nietzsche believed that the strongest individuals are those who regularly reassess their beliefs to ensure they remain aligned with their evolving goals. In this sense, revaluation is both a philosophy and a lifestyle. It is a commitment to growth. It is a refusal to stagnate. It is a determination to live intentionally. One of the most powerful aspects of Nietzsche's idea is that it returns. agency to the individual. Nihilism feels heavy because it makes people feel powerless. They sense that the world is too complex, too chaotic, too indifferent. Revaluation counters this passivity. It invites individuals to reclaim ownership of their lives. It transforms the individual from a passive recipient of meaning into an active creator of meaning. Nietzsche believed that once individuals begin creating their own values, the weight of nihilism fades. Not because the world suddenly becomes meaningful on its own, but because meaning begins to radiate from within the individual. Purpose becomes self-generated. Identity becomes self-forged. Life becomes a work of art rather than a series of obligations. The impact of revaluation extends beyond the individual. When enough people begin questioning inherited values, society itself evolves. Old institutions adapt or fade. New cultural movements emerge. Innovation flourishes. Creativity expands. Nietzsche believed that entire civilizations could be revitalized by the courage of individuals willing to revalue their values, yet he also knew that most people fear this level of freedom. Many prefer the comfort of established beliefs, even when those beliefs restrict their growth. This is why Nietzsche often described the path of revaluation as a path for the few. It's a path for those strong enough to carry the burden of autonomy. But he did not mean that only geniuses or heroes could take this path. He meant that anyone with courage, honesty, and resilience could begin. The first step is simply recognizing that one's values are not fixed. The second step is questioning them. The third step is shaping them. The fourth step is living them. There are ideas in philosophy that attempt to describe the world. And then there are ideas that attempt to describe the energy that moves the world. Nietzsche believed that beneath all human actions, beneath ambition, fear, creativity, conflict, growth, and even morality, there existed a deeper impulse. An impulse not limited to survival, not reducible to pleasure, not explained fully by biology or social conditioning. It was something more fundamental, something woven into the structure of life itself. He called this force the will to power. To understand this idea, one must first set aside the common misunderstanding. Nietzsche did not mean domination over others. He did not describe a desire for political power, social authority, or physical control. These are only surface-level expressions, crude and simplistic compared to what he intended. The will to power is something inward, something connected to growth, self-overcoming, and the continual effort to expand one's capacities. Nietzsche believed that all living things strive not merely to survive, but to become more. Plants stretch toward the sun. Animals sharpen their instincts. Humans push their skills, their understanding, their creativity. Life, in his view, is not static. It wants to intensify. It wants to express its strength. It wants to transform itself. This fundamental drive toward expansion is what Nietzsche meant by the will to power. It is the engine behind human ambition. It is the current beneath thought and emotion. It is the reason why individuals feel restless when their potential is unexpressed, and fulfilled when they rise above their limitations. The will to power is not a concept of domination, but of direction. It points toward what a person could become if they embraced the full range of their abilities. Nietzsche believed that modern culture often misunderstands human motivation by reducing it to simpler forms: survival, pleasure, comfort. But these explanations fail to capture the intensity of human striving. People risk comfort for achievement. They risk safety for meaning. They sacrifice stability for creativity. They endure hardship in pursuit of something greater than mere survival. This, for Nietzsche, reveals that human beings are motivated by a deeper force. Even suffering, he argued, can be an expression of the will to power when it is connected to growth. Athletes endure pain to build strength. Artists endure frustration to refine their craft. Thinkers endure uncertainty to discover truth. In each case, struggle is embraced because, through struggle, life expands. The will to power is therefore not a desire to avoid hardship, but a desire to transform it. Nietzsche observed that individuals who lack this inner drive often experience hardship as meaningless. They feel crushed by difficulty because they cannot connect it to a larger purpose. but those with a strong will to power see hardship as material for growth. They treat obstacles not as signals to stop, but as signals to evolve. This shift in perspective transforms one's entire relationship with life. Challenges become opportunities. Limitations become invitations. Failure becomes information. Nietzsche believed that this attitude separates the strong spirit from the weak spirit. The weak spirit is defined not by lack of ability, but by lack of direction. It avoids conflict, avoids growth, avoids responsibility. It prefers familiarity to expansion. It chooses comfort over becoming. The strong spirit, by contrast, is alive with possibility. It seeks to express itself fully. It does not wait for meaning to arrive from outside. It draws meaning from the act of striving. The strong spirit lives with a sense of upward movement, even in difficulty. It is willing to take risks because it knows that stagnation is a slow death of the soul. Nietzsche did not claim that everyone is born with the same will to power. Rather, he believed that some cultivate it while others suppress it. Society often encourages suppression by promoting values of safety, obedience, and conformity. These values, while useful for maintaining order, can weaken the individual's inner drive. Nietzsche believed that many people internalize these expectations without realizing the cost. They trade their potential for approval, their creativity for predictability, their uniqueness for comfort. The will to power is the antidote to this stagnation. It awakens the individual to their unused possibilities. It encourages exploration. It encourages experimentation. It encourages self-overcoming, the process of surpassing one's previous limitations. To Nietzsche, self-overcoming was the highest expression of the will to power. It is the moment when a person recognizes that they are not a finished product but a process, a becoming. Self-overcoming is not about competing with others. It is about competing with oneself. It is the decision to rise above who one was yesterday. It is the recognition that the self is both the obstacle and the path. Nietzsche believed that individuals must become sculptors of their own character, shaping themselves with the same care and intention that an artist shapes a work of art. This requires honesty. One must confront one's weaknesses without excuses. One must also recognize one's strengths without false modesty. Nietzsche believed that true growth demands clarity about what holds you back and clarity about what calls you forward. Without this clarity, the will to power becomes scattered, expressed in impulses rather than purpose. When the will to power is directed intentionally, it becomes creative. Nietzsche believed that creativity was one of the highest expressions of human life. Creativity is not limited to art. It includes building a career, forming relationships, developing skills, shaping identity, and even reimagining one's future. Whenever individuals bring something into the world that did not exist before, whether a concept, a business, a perspective, or a transformation, they act from the will to power. This creativity, Nietzsche argued, is essential for overcoming nihilism. Without creative energy, individuals remain trapped in the emptiness of collapsed values. They drift, they react, they follow. But when the will to power awakens, they begin to shape meaning rather than seek it passively. They take ownership of their lives. They begin the process of revaluation described in Part 3, the will to. Power is therefore the inner force that makes revaluation possible. It is the spark that ignites transformation. It is the momentum that pushes individuals beyond despair. Nietzsche saw it as the fundamental expression of life's ability to renew itself. Yet the will to power has a shadow. When it is suppressed, ignored, or misdirected, it can turn inward destructively. Nietzsche observed that people who cannot express their potential outwardly often turn their energy against themselves. They become self-critical, pessimistic, resentful. Instead of growing, they shrink. Instead of expanding, they retreat. This inward collapse is one of the tragedies of modern life. People feel powerless not because they lack ability, but because they lack connection to their inner drive. Reconnecting with the will to power, therefore, requires courage. It requires trusting oneself, even when uncertain. It requires acting, even when afraid. It requires embracing change rather than resisting it. The will to power does not promise comfort. It promises vitality, to understand how this force shapes human psychology. Nietzsche offered an insight that remains remarkably relevant. A person's life becomes larger or smaller depending on the strength of their inner drive. When the will to power is strong, life feels expansive. Possibilities appear everywhere. Difficulties energize rather than discourage. When the will to power is weak, life feels constricted. Choices seem limited. Risks seem terrifying. Challenges seem overwhelming. The will to power, therefore, determines the quality of one's inner world. It is the force that turns potential into action, dreams into plans, ideas into reality. It is the measure of how fully a person engages with life. Strength, Nietzsche believed, is not something granted by nature or bestowed by circumstance. It is something grown, something cultivated through struggle, reflection, and transformation. In his view, the greatest battles are not fought against external forces, but against the inner barriers that hold a person back: fear, habit, self-doubt, comfort, resentment, and the tendency to repeat familiar patterns even when they no longer serve our growth. Self-overcoming, the act of rising above one's former self, is therefore at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. It is the practical expression of the will to power, while the will to power provides the energy. Self-overcoming is the method through which that energy is shaped. It is how individuals turn potential into reality. Nietzsche did not imagine strength as perfection, nor as dominance over others. Strength for him was the ability to confront truth without collapsing, to embrace uncertainty without retreating, to acknowledge weakness without becoming defined by it. Strength is the capacity to transform oneself even when the world provides no guarantees, no fixed meaning, no external validation. It begins with confrontation, but not confrontation with society, or with other people, or with external obstacles. It begins with confrontation with oneself. Nietzsche believed that every individual carries within them two versions of themselves: the self they currently are, the self they could become. Between these selves lies resistance. Resistance that takes the form of fear, laziness, denial, excuses, comfort, or the temptation to return to familiar patterns. Self-overcoming requires facing this resistance honestly. Nietzsche often described human beings as works in progress and finished, evolving, constantly becoming. The mistake many people make is treating themselves as finished, as complete, as though their identity is fixed once and for all. This belief leads to stagnation. It prevents growth. It traps individuals in narratives that may once have been true, but no longer reflect who they are capable of becoming. To overcome oneself, one must first recognize that the self is not a fixed essence, but a dynamic process. Identity is not a statue, but a river. It changes with every experience, every decision, every aspiration. By embracing this fluidity, individuals gain the freedom to direct their own evolution. They become active participants in their own becoming rather than passive recipients of their circumstances. But self-overcoming is not an easy path. It demands discipline. It demands discomfort. It demands the courage to acknowledge one's limitations. Nietzsche believed that many people avoid self-examination because they fear what they might find. They fear discovering inconsistencies, unrealized potential, or truths about themselves that contradict their existing self-image. Yet without this honesty, no transformation is possible. True strength begins with truthfulness about oneself. This truthfulness is not cruel or self-destructive. It is clear-eyed, balanced, and grounded in the desire to grow. Nietzsche believed that honesty, when paired with the will to power, becomes a tool for self-creation. It allows individuals to see not only their weaknesses, but also their possibilities. It allows them to pinpoint the exact areas where growth is needed. Once this clarity is achieved, self-overcoming becomes a matter of practice-repeated actions that slowly reshape the individual. Nietzsche did not believe in sudden enlightenment or overnight transformation. Growth, in his view, is gradual. It requires persistence, It requires learning through trial and error. Most importantly, it requires resistance. Without resistance, there is no strength. He often compared human development to the forging of metal. Raw metal is not strong on its own. It must be shaped, heated, pressured, folded, and refined. Strength emerges not from avoiding fire, but from passing through it. Likewise, individuals develop strength, not by avoiding difficulty, but by engaging with it. This does not mean seeking suffering for its own sake. Nietzsche was not glorifying pain. Instead, he recognized that struggle is the natural environment in which human potential reveals itself. People discover their abilities not in moments of comfort, but in moments of challenge. They learn resilience not through ease, but through facing obstacles. They build character not through routine, but through adaptation, self-overcoming. Therefore, transforms suffering into material for growth. Even failures become meaningful when they contribute to a larger trajectory of becoming. Nietzsche argued that those who avoid challenges in order to preserve comfort ultimately weaken themselves. Comfort becomes a cage. Safety becomes stagnation. Individuals forget their potential because they stop testing it. The key for Nietzsche is orientation. Struggle must be oriented toward becoming. It must have direction. It must align with a vision of who one seeks to become. Without vision, struggle turns into chaos. With vision, struggle becomes purposeful. This vision does not need to be grand or heroic. It simply needs to provide direction. It is the image of a better self, more honest, more disciplined, more courageous, more creative, more resilient. Nietzsche believed that the act of striving toward this image, even imperfectly, is what gives life meaning. Self-overcoming also requires overcoming the internal voices that encourage passivity. Nietzsche often criticized what he called the spirit of gravity, the inner heaviness that pulls individuals downward, convincing them to settle, to shrink, to avoid risks. This spirit whispers that change is impossible, that effort is pointless, that one must accept one's limitations as permanent. Nietzsche believed that individuals must resist this gravitational pull. They must cultivate inner lightness, a sense of possibility, curiosity, and openness to transformation. Lightness is not naivete. It is the refusal to be crushed by one's circumstances. Self-overcoming also involves facing one's past. Many people become trapped by past decisions, past failures, or past identities. They believe they must remain consistent with who they once were. Nietzsche rejected this idea. He believed that individuals can always become something new. The past is not a prison unless one chooses to remain inside it. To overcome oneself is to break free from the stories that no longer serve one's becoming. But Nietzsche also understood that self-overcoming does not occur in isolation. Human beings are influenced by culture, norms, expectations, and the pressure to conform. These external forces can strengthen or weaken one's inner will. Society often encourages sameness over individuality, obedience over authenticity, comfort over growth. Nietzsche believed that those who seek to overcome themselves must learn to navigate these influences without being dominated by them. This does not mean rejecting society. It means not allowing society to define one's limits. It also means accepting that others may not understand one's transformation. People who grow often disrupt the expectations of those around them. Nietzsche warned that individuals committed to becoming their highest selves must be prepared for misunderstanding, criticism, or even isolation. Yet he believed this price is worth paying. It is better to be misunderstood while growing than to be understood while stagnating. Self-overcoming, when practiced consistently, leads to a profound shift in the individual's relationship with life. Challenges become invitations. Uncertainty becomes a canvas. The future becomes an open field rather than a looming threat. The individual becomes less reactive and more intentional. They begin to shape their life from within rather than allowing external forces to shape it for them. This is the birth of strength, not brute power. Not dominance, not superiority, but inner solidity. Strength becomes the ability to carry oneself through difficulty. It becomes the capacity to act according to one's values even when it is uncomfortable. It becomes the willingness to revise one's beliefs when they no longer reflect one's growth. It becomes the resilience to rebuild when life collapses. Strength is not loud. It is steady. It is quiet. It is grounded, and perhaps most importantly, strength, once cultivated, becomes self-sustaining. Each act of self-overcoming builds confidence for future challenges. Each step forward reinforces one's sense of direction. Each moment of courage strengthens the will to power, making the next moment easier. Nietzsche believed that through self-overcoming, individuals become capable of shaping the world rather than being shaped by it. They gain the ability to create values, to build meaning, to chart their own path. They become, in a sense, artists of their own existence. This brings us to the next stage of the journey, understanding how power operates not only within individuals but between individuals and groups. For Nietzsche saw that the psychology of strength and weakness extends beyond the self into the structure of culture itself. And so, in the next part, we explore the dynamics of master and slave morality, a powerful lens through which Nietzsche examined how values emerge and why some values empower while others constrain. To understand Nietzsche's philosophy of power, one must move beyond modern associations with domination or control. Nietzsche was not interested in political rulers or social hierarchies in the ordinary sense. Instead, he explored the psychological foundations of power, how individuals perceive themselves, how they respond to life, and how values emerge from different states of inner strength. This exploration led him to one of his most provocative ideas, the distinction between master morality and slave morality. These terms, while dramatic, are not descriptions of social roles, but of mindsets. They represent two fundamentally different ways of interpreting the world, forming values, and responding to experience. Each arises from a particular orientation toward life. Nietzsche believed that understanding this distinction is essential for grasping how cultures evolve, how individuals internalize values, and why some forms of morality empower while others restrict. The master mindset, in Nietzsche's view, emerges from fullness and overflowing sense of life, confidence, and inner strength. The master does not ask whether life is good or bad. He affirms life by creating values that express his nature. He seeks challenge because challenge allows him to grow. He does not resent others. He focuses on his own becoming. The master does not measure himself against society. He measures himself against his own potential. Master morality arises from self-respect. It begins with the feeling, this is good for me, this expresses my strength, my vitality. It does not impose standards on others. It simply defines values from a position of inner authority. Nietzsche described the master as someone who acts independently of external approval. He is not arrogant. He is internally anchored. He does not seek validation. He seeks expression. His values are creative, not reactive. Slave morality, by contrast, arises from a sense of powerlessness. It emerges when individuals feel constrained, vulnerable, or overshadowed by forces they cannot control. Instead of affirming their own nature, they respond defensively to the world. Nietzsche did not use the term slave to describe social status, but to describe a psychological condition, a mindset shaped by fear, insecurity, and resentment. Slave morality begins with reaction. It asks not, what strengthens me, but what threatens me. It defines good not by what expresses inner vitality, but by what protects from suffering, challenge, or discomfort. It elevates humility, obedience, and conformity because these traits reduce conflict and ease insecurity. It condemns strength, ambition, and independence when these qualities appear threatening or unattainable. Slave morality, Nietzsche argued, is built on resentment, the quiet, bitter belief that others have advantages one cannot achieve. Instead of striving for strength, individuals trapped in this mindset condemn strength itself. Instead of pursuing growth, they label growth as arrogance. Instead of confronting their limitations, They moralize their limitations into virtues. For Nietzsche, resentment is one of the most corrosive forces in human psychology. It distorts perception. It leads individuals to create values not out of authenticity, but out of reaction. It turns weakness into a moral standard and strength into a moral offense. This inversion of values, this transformation of what I cannot do into what one should not do, is at the core of slave morality. But Nietzsche's insight goes further. He observed that entire cultures can internalize these mindsets. Some cultures encourage ambition, responsibility, courage, and individuality. Others elevate conformity, comfort, safety, and equality at any cost. Nietzsche did not condemn any culture outright, but he warned that cultures dominated by slave morality often produce individuals who avoid self-overcoming. They discourage risk. They discourage excellence. They prioritize stability over vitality. Such cultures may appear peaceful, but beneath the surface lies stagnation. The master mindset, on the other hand, promotes creativity, exploration. In personal responsibility, it recognizes that life involves struggle and that strength emerges through engagement with difficulty. It does not demonize suffering, but sees it as part of growth. Nietzsche believed that cultures shaped by the master mindset tend to produce individuals capable of shaping meaning for themselves rather than relying on inherited beliefs, yet Nietzsche never suggested that most people are born into one mindset or the other. These are not fixed identities. There are psychological tendencies that individuals can move between. A person overwhelmed by resentment today may discover inner strength tomorrow. Someone confident today may fall into reactive fear later. What matters is not which mindset one begins with, but which mindset one cultivates. Cultivating the master mindset requires honesty. It requires acknowledging resentment whenever it arises and refusing to let it shape one's values. It requires taking responsibility for one's life, rather than blaming circumstances, fate, or others. It requires courage, not loud, dramatic courage, but the steady courage of daily self-overcoming. Nietzsche believed that individuals capable of recognizing resentment within themselves and transforming it into strength are on the path to becoming creators of values. Cultivating the master mindset also involves embracing individuality. The master does not compare himself endlessly to others. He does not seek approval as the foundation of his worth. His value arises from his own actions, his own growth, his own engagement with life. Nietzsche believed that individuals must learn to trust their instincts and their aspirations. They must be willing to think independently, even when others object. They must be willing to stand alone when necessary. This independence is not isolation. It is sovereignty over one's inner life. Slave morality, however, is built on comparison. It looks outward constantly, measuring worth against others' success, status, or approval. It evaluates people not by their character but by their conformity to social norms. It seeks safety in numbers and comfort in sameness. It suppresses individuality because individuality threatens the fragile security it depends on. Nietzsche believed that this reactive mindset prevents genuine growth. It keeps individuals trapped in cycles of resentment, envy, and dependence. It encourages them to avoid difficulty rather than confront it. It replaces self-overcoming with self-protection. Yet Nietzsche did not condemn compassion or cooperation qualities often associated with slave morality. Rather, he believed that virtues must arise from strength, not fear. Compassion born from strength enhances life. Compassion born from resentment denies life. Cooperation rooted in confidence enriches society. Cooperation rooted in conformity deadens individuality. The difference lies in motivation. A strong individual chooses compassion because it reflects their character. A fearful individual chooses compassion because it avoids conflict. Nietzsche believed that values only hold power when they come from an authentic, life-affirming source. This distinction between mindsets also helps explain how morality evolves over time. Nietzsche argued that many moral systems throughout history arose not from strength but from resentment. These systems framed power as evil, ambition as dangerous, and excellence as unfair. They elevated meekness, humility, and obedience as moral absolutes. While such systems provided comfort to the weak, they also discouraged growth. In contrast, value systems created by strong individuals celebrated courage, creativity, and achievement. They encouraged people to push boundaries. They fostered innovation, art, philosophy, and exploration. Nietzsche saw these systems as expressions of human vitality. However, no system remains pure. Over time, values shift. Societies become more complex. The strengths of one era become the constraints of the next. Nietzsche believed that every generation must examine which mindset shapes their values, consciously choose the direction of their culture. For the individual, the key is awareness. Nietzsche never intended his ideas to divide people into categories. Instead, he wanted individuals to reflect deeply. Are my values reactive or creative? Do they arise from strength or fear? Do they expand my life or restrict it? Do they express who I am or protect me from what I fear? These questions reveal where a person stands in relation to their own potential, and they lead naturally to another insight, to become who one truly is. One must break free from inherited values. One must become the author of one's own life. This brings us to the next stage of Nietzsche's journey, the idea of becoming who you are. An exploration of identity, authenticity, and the creation of a personal path beyond the expectations of society. There is a phrase that appears throughout Nietzsche's writings, one that seems simple at first glance, but reveals extraordinary depth the more one reflects upon it. Become who you are. It is not an instruction to remain as one is, nor is it an invitation to invent an arbitrary identity. Rather, it is a call to uncover, cultivate, and embody the deepest possibilities within oneself, possibilities that often lie hidden beneath fear, habit, social conditioning, and self-doubt. To Nietzsche, the human being is not a finished product, but a becoming. Identity is not discovered once and for all. It is shaped continuously through choices, actions, and the courage to confront one's own potential. Becoming oneself is not a return to some true self buried within, nor a blind pursuit of whatever desires arise in the moment. It is a disciplined, intentional shaping of life, guided by one's highest strengths, deepest values, and boldest visions. This process begins with a simple but difficult question: what in me seeks expression? Nietzsche believed that every individual possesses unique instincts, talents, and drives that often remain dormant due to external pressures. Society teaches conformity. Families teach expectations. Schools teach rules. Cultures teach norms. Without noticing, individuals internalize these influences and begin living according to scripts written by others. Becoming who you are means questioning these scripts. It means asking whether the goals you pursue are truly yours or merely inherited. Whether your beliefs reflect your own understanding or simply what you were taught to believe. Whether your routines express your inner desires or conceal them. Nietzsche believed that the greatest tragedy is not failure, but the failure to live one's own life. This questioning requires honesty. And honesty, Nietzsche argued, is one of the rarest virtues, not because people intentionally lie to themselves, but because truth forces confrontation with uncomfortable realities. Individuals often cling to identities that feel safe because they avoid the uncertainty of growth. They prefer predictable patterns over the discomfort of transformation. They remain loyal to old versions of themselves long after those versions have ceased to reflect their inner world. Becoming who you are requires breaking this loyalty. It requires admitting when a chapter of life has ended. It requires letting go of identities that no longer serve growth. It requires stepping away from environments that suppress one's potential. Nietzsche saw identity not as continuity, but as evolution. The self is strongest when it is willing to shed its skin like a serpent, to renew itself repeatedly. But this shedding is painful. Every transformation involves loss, the loss of certainty, the loss of comfort, and often the loss of approval. Nietzsche believed that many people avoid becoming themselves because they fear social consequences. They fear disappointing others. They fear rejection. They fear standing out. They fear being misunderstood. Fear, he argued, is one of the greatest obstacles to self-becoming. To overcome fear, individuals must cultivate what Nietzsche called great style, a way of living that reflects inner coherence, authenticity, and purpose. Great style is not about appearance, it is about alignment. Every action, word, and decision expresses the same inner direction. The individual becomes unified rather than fragmented. They do not pretend to be someone else. They do not betray themselves to fit in. They do not compromise their growth to avoid discomfort. This style emerges only when one has the courage to stand alone. Nietzsche believed that solitude plays a vital role in becoming who one is. Solitude is not isolation from others. It is freedom from external noise. It provides space to hear one's own thoughts, to reflect on one's desires, to question one's values without interference. In solitude, individuals discover which parts of themselves are authentic and which are borrowed. But solitude also tests strength. Many fear being alone because it removes distractions. It forces them to confront their inner contradictions. Nietzsche believed that individuals who learn to value solitude possess a powerful advantage. They no longer depend on constant reassurance. Their identity becomes rooted internally rather than externally. Yet becoming oneself does not end with solitude. The next step is integration, the process of bringing one's inner clarity into the world. Nietzsche believed that identity becomes real only through action. Wishes, dreams, and intentions mean little unless they are embodied. To become who you are, you must do what your becoming demands. You must shape your habits, environment, relationships to support the life you seek to live. Integration also requires consistency. Nietzsche emphasized that character is not formed by grand gestures, but by daily actions. The self is shaped through repetition, through choices made repeatedly until they become part of one's nature. If a person wishes to cultivate courage, they must practice courage in situations large and small. If they seek creativity, they must create regularly. If they desire independence, they must make decisions without relying on approval. In this way, becoming oneself becomes a craft, a form of artistry. Life becomes a canvas. An identity becomes a work of art in progress. But every artist encounters resistance. And the internal resistance is often stronger than any external obstacle. Nietzsche believed that individuals carry within them a constant tension between safety and aspiration. Safety whispers caution. Aspiration whispers possibility. The self becomes who it is by listening to the latter without carelessly ignoring the former. Balance is required courage, guided by wisdom rather than recklessness. Another critical aspect of becoming oneself is the rejection of resentment. As explored in Part 6, resentment distorts one's identity by defining oneself against others. It narrows perspective, makes individuals reactive rather than creative. Nietzsche believed that resentment is incompatible with becoming oneself, because one's identity becomes entangled with comparison and grievance. To become who you are, you must release resentment, meant make because others deserve forgiveness. But because you deserve freedom, freedom from bitterness, freedom from comparison, freedom from the weight of the past. Nietzsche also believed that becoming oneself requires embracing one's fate. This does not mean passive acceptance of everything that happens. It means recognizing that life's circumstances, challenges, and limitations can become material for growth. Instead of wishing for a different past, a different family, a different personality, or different opportunities, individuals must ask, how can I transform what I have into what I will become? This attitude, known as amor fati, love of one's fate, turns life's obstacles into tools. It transforms setbacks into lessons. It rejects self-pity in favor of self-creation. Nietzsche believed that when individuals embrace their fate, they stop fantasizing about alternate realities and begin working with the reality they have. Becoming oneself also involves aspiration, imitation. Many people model their lives after figures they admire, believing that greatness lies in copying greatness. Nietzsche disagreed. He believed that admiration can inspire but should never replace individuality. Every person has a unique configuration of experiences, instincts, and abilities. Trying to become someone else wastes the opportunity to become oneself. Greatness, in Nietzsche's view, is not a universal standard but a personal ascent. It is the realization of one's particular strengths, not the adoption of someone else's. The question is not, how can I be like them? How far can I go given who I am? This focus on personal ascent changes how we view success. Success becomes less about external achievements and more about internal alignment. A person who lives authentically, courageously, and creatively may be far closer to becoming who they are than someone who achieves fame or wealth by betraying their nature. As individuals progress through this journey, Nietzsche believed they experience a profound transformation. They move from being shaped by life to shaping life itself. They stop drifting and begin directing. They stop reacting and begin creating. They stop asking for meaning and begin generating meaning. This transformation marks the shift from living as a product of circumstances to living as an agent of one's becoming, and it prepares the individual for the highest stage of Nietzsche's vision, where one becomes not only the creator of one's identity, but the creator of values that can influence the future. This leads us into the next part of our exploration, the path of the creator. There comes a point in Nietzsche's philosophical journey where the individual moves beyond self-discovery, beyond self-overcoming, and into something far more profound, creation. Up to this point, the path has been inward, examining one's assumptions, questioning inherited values, confronting internal resistance, shedding identities that no longer serve growth. But Nietzsche believed that the highest expression of human strength occurs when the individual turns outward and shapes the world through the creation of new values. For Nietzsche, values are not abstract principles floating above life. It are the foundations upon which people build meaning, identity, and purpose. Values influence how individuals interpret success, failure, happiness, suffering, and even themselves. Cultures rise and fall on the strength or weakness of their values. Individuals thrive or wither, depending on whether the values they follow empower or restrict their potential. Most people inherit their values passively. They adopt moral frameworks from family, religion, education, or society without question. But as explored earlier, these inherited frameworks often become outdated, rigid, or misaligned with one's personal growth. Nietzsche believed that once individuals awaken to this misalignment, they face a responsibility and an opportunity to create values that reflect their own nature rather than the expectations of others. This act of creation is not arbitrary. Nietzsche did not encourage people to invent values impulsively or rebelliously. True creation, he argued, arises from deep introspection and rigorous honesty. The individual must understand their drives, strengths, passions, and aspirations. They must examine the conditions of their life and determine which principles lead them toward expansion rather than contraction. They must build values that resonate with their becoming. In this sense, value creation is an act of alignment. Values become the architecture of one's inner world. They guide choices, shape habits, and provide direction when life becomes chaotic. They offer stability without becoming traps. But this stability does not come from rigidity. It comes from coherence. Creative values are alive. They adapt as the individual grows, just as the individual adapts through living them. Nietzsche believed that the ability to create values distinguishes the strong spirit from the weak spirit. The weak spirit clings to inherited beliefs for security. The strong spirit accepts the uncertainty of creation because it recognizes that authenticity is worth the risk. To create values is to accept responsibility for one's life. It is to say, I will determine what has meaning for me. This responsibility can feel overwhelming at first. Many people fear creating their own values because they fear making mistakes. They fear that without external guidance they might choose wrongly. Nietzsche acknowledged this fear but argued that mistakes are not failures. They are essential steps in the creative process. Values must be tested in life. They must be challenged, revised, strengthened, or abandoned based on experience. Creativity requires experimentation, and experimentation requires permission to err. Another challenge arises from social pressure. Created values often contradict the values of the majority. They may appear unconventional, uncomfortable, or incomprehensible to others. Nietzsche believed that value creators must be prepared to stand apart from the herd, not out of arrogance, but out of commitment to authenticity. The creator must possess a quiet confidence rooted in self-knowledge. They must trust their inner compass even when external voices attempt to steer them elsewhere. But value creation is not isolation. Nietzsche did not envision creators as antisocial or detached. On the contrary, he believed their influence shapes culture, often indirectly. When individuals live according to their values with integrity, they inspire others to question their own assumptions. Authenticity has ripple effects. It challenges conformity simply by existing. Nietzsche saw value creators as cultural pioneers and individuals who plant seeds that future generations may cultivate. Even if those seeds are not immediately recognized, value creation also demands imagination. Nietzsche believed that individuals must envision possibilities beyond the present. They must imagine what a fuller, more vibrant life could look like. Without imagination, values remain tied to the past. With imagination, values become instruments of transformation. This imagination must be grounded in reality. Nietzsche distrusted idealism, detached from life. True creators, he argued, work with the raw materials of their circumstances' limitations, challenges, experiences, and desires. They do not escape the world. They engage with it more deeply. They shape the future by shaping themselves. At the heart of value creation lies a simple truth. Meaning is not discovered. It is manufactured. It is sculpted, refined, and embodied. Nietzsche believed that meaning becomes powerful only when lived. Values do not gain strength from being written or spoken. They gain strength from being practiced. When individuals align their actions with their values, they create coherence. This coherence generates inner stability, a sense of purpose that persists even when life becomes uncertain. One of Nietzsche's most powerful ideas related to creation is the concept of giving style to one's character. This involves curating one's habits, emotional responses, thought patterns, and aspirations into a unified whole. Just as an artist shapes raw material into form, individuals shape their character into something intentional. This is not about perfection, but about direction, a clear sense of who one aims to become, and the values that guide that journey. Value creation also intersects with Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, the thought experiment that asks whether one could will their life, with all its joys and sufferings, to repeat infinitely. Nietzsche believed that created values must be strong enough to withstand this test. They must produce a life one would affirm rather than escape. This affirmation is the ultimate expression of empowerment, the willingness to embrace life fully, without wishing for an alternative existence. But how does one practically create values? Nietzsche never offered a step-by-step method because creation cannot be formulaic. Still, his writings suggest a process. First, examine your life honestly. Identify where inherited values cause conflict. Recognize what strengthens you and what weakens you. Second, reflect on your aspirations. Consider the qualities you admire, the goals that inspire you, the direction your inner drive naturally leans toward. Third, establish principles that support this direction. Values grounded in authenticity. Align your life with your deepest potential. Fourth, test your values through action. See which ones withstand challenge, strengthen, or reshape them based on experience. Fifth, live your values consistently. Allow them to become part of your being, guiding your decisions, shaping your habits, influencing your relationships. Sixth, revise when necessary. Growth requires adaptation. Values must evolve as the individual evolves. Through this process, Nietzsche believed, individuals transition from mere participants in life to co-creators of reality. They begin living not as products of their environment, but as architects of their future. Creators also contribute to culture in ways that exceed personal transformation. When even a small number of individuals commit to creating values rather than inheriting them, society shifts. Stagnant norms are questioned. Innovation emerges. New forms of art, thought, and expression flourish. Nietzsche believed that cultural renewal depends on value creators, those willing to break from conventional thinking to imagine new possibilities. Yet he warned that creation must be distinguished from destruction. Some reject old values impulsively, seeking chaos rather than transformation. True creators destroy only what stands in the way of growth. Their aim is not rebellion, but renewal. They replace the old with something stronger, something more aligned with human flourishing. The path of the creator ultimately prepares the individual for Nietzsche's highest ideal, the Bermensch, the one who not only creates values, but embodies a new mode of being. The Bermensch is not a distant myth or a biological improvement. It is a symbol for the individual who has fully embraced the process of becoming, who has overcome nihilism through creativity, and who has forged a life grounded in self-authored meaning. To understand this ideal, we now turn to the final part of our journey, a vision of humanity's potential. Interpreted not as a prophecy, but as an invitation. Among all of Nietzsche's concepts, none has been more misunderstood or more powerful than the idea of the Bermensch, often translated as the overman or a beyond man. When Nietzsche introduced this figure, he was not describing a superior race, a political class, or a physical elite. Instead, he presented an image of the possibility of humanity, its future, its highest expression, its potential fully realized. The Bermensch is not a biological prediction, but a philosophical invitation. A symbol for what human beings could become if they learn to overcome themselves, create their own values, and live with full affirmation of life. To understand this vision, we must begin with the context in which Nietzsche placed it. The modern world, he believed, was entering a time of unprecedented transformation. Old values were collapsing. Traditional sources of meaning were losing authority. As explored in earlier parts, this collapse led to nihilism, a feeling of emptiness and confusion. Nietzsche feared that if humanity did not respond creatively, it would fall into passivity, resentment, or ideological fanaticism. For Nietzsche, the Bermensch was the response to nihilism. It was the alternative to despair. The possibility that emerges when individuals decide not merely to endure the collapse of old values, but to rise above it by creating new ones. The Bermensch represents the culmination of the path we have traced through this book, beginning with the collapse of meaning, Part 1. Moving through the psychological struggle of nihilism, Part 2, the revaluation of values, Part 3, the will to power, Part 4, self-overcoming, Part 5. The psychology of power, Part 6, the creation of new values, Part 8. It is the final step in Nietzsche's vision of human development. The Bermensch, in essence, is the individual who has learned how to fully become themselves. They are not constrained by inherited beliefs or defined by external expectations. They do not cling to the past or fear the future. Their identity is not reactive, but creative. They shape their life intentionally, like an artist shaping a work of art. Their actions arise from inner coherence, not from the need for approval, fear, or conformity, but what qualities define this higher individual? 1. The Bermensch lives beyond resentment, Nietzsche believed, is one of the greatest limitations of the human spirit. It arises when people feel powerless and respond by condemning the strengths of others or by moralizing their own weakness. The Bermensch transcends resentment entirely. They do not define their identity in reaction to others. They do not envy, blame, or seek revenge. Their energy flows into creation, not complaint. They judge themselves according to their own values, not according to the standards of the herd. This freedom from resentment allows them to act from clarity, rather than emotional distortion too. The Bermensch creates values rather than inheriting them, while most people follow values given to them by society. Religion or tradition, the Bermensch creates their own. This does not mean they reject all existing values. It means they examine them deeply and adopt only what aligns with their highest nature. They take responsibility for the meaning of their life. Through this value creation, they become independent thinkers, capable of shaping their own moral landscape. This independence gives them direction, even in a world without universal meaning. 3. The Bermensch embraces life. Fully, Nietzsche believed that the highest form of strength is the ability to affirm. Life's not just the pleasant or successful parts, but all of it. The Bermensch does not resist the reality of suffering, chaos, or impermanence. They incorporate these elements into their understanding of life. They see challenge not as punishment, but as raw material for growth. They do not wish to escape life's difficulties. They aim to transform them into opportunities. This is the essence of Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate. 4. The Bermensch practices eternal recurrence as a thought experiment. Nietzsche introduced the thought experiment of the eternal recurrence as a test of strength. If you had to relive your life, every joy, every sorrow, every mistake, every triumph over and over for eternity, could you affirm it? The Bermensch answers, yes, not because their life is perfect, but because they accept life so fully that even its imperfections become necessary and meaningful. This affirmation reflects the highest form of psychological resilience. 5. The Bermensch lives creatively. Life becomes a canvas for the Bermensch. They do not merely adapt to circumstances, they shape them. They view themselves as both the raw material and the sculptor. Creativity for Nietzsche is not limited to art. It includes the creation of identity, purpose, relationships, projects, and possibilities. To live creatively is to live intentionally. With imagination and commitment, this creativity makes the Bermensch a symbol of possibility. 6. The Bermensch moves beyond good and evil. Its phrase, beyond good and evil, does not mean immoral behavior. Instead, it signifies moving beyond rigid, inherited categories of morality. The Bermensch does not follow rules simply because they are traditional. They evaluate actions based on whether they enhance life, strength, authenticity, and growth. Their morality is flexible, dynamic, and aligned with their inner coherence. They are guided by wisdom, not dogma. The path to the Bermensch is a path of becoming. Not a rival. Nietzsche did not expect people to become Bermenschen instantly, or even fully. The Bermensch is an ideal, a direction, a horizon. No one reaches it perfectly, but striving toward it transforms how one lives. It shifts the focus from survival to flourishing, from fear to courage, from conformity to creation. In this way, the Bermensch is not an endpoint but a process. Nietzsche believed that the very act of striving toward one's highest potential creates meaning. The Bermensch is simply the name he gave to the human being who lives without asking permission from inherited values. Their confidence comes from inner alignment, not external praise. Their strength comes from self-overcoming, not dominance. Their joy comes from affirming life, not escaping it. Humanity's future depends on creators. Nietzsche saw the future as a crossroads. One path leads to nihilism, stagnation, and the rise of mass conformity. The other leads to creativity, vitality, and new forms of meaning. The Bermensch represents the second path. They are the ones who will shape the values of the future, not through force, but through example. Their lives become proof that meaning can be created in a world that no longer provides it. Nietzsche did not believe that everyone would take this path, but he believed that humanity only needs a minority of creators, individuals strong enough to redefine meaning for themselves and courageous enough to inspire others. In this sense, the Bermensch is not separate from humanity, but a possibility within humanity. Why the Bermensch?
Matters.
Today, though, Nietzsche wrote in the 19th century, his vision feels remarkably modern. The world today is filled with uncertainty, fragmentation, and rapid change. Old narratives are weakening. New narratives have yet to stabilize. Many individuals feel the same weight of meaninglessness Nietzsche predicted. They search for direction in a world where traditional anchors no longer provide solid ground. The concept of the Bermensch offers a philosophical alternative, not a doctrine, not a rule book, but a way of thinking about human potential. It suggests that meaning is not something we wait for. It is something we build. Identity is not something we inherit. It is something we craft. Strength is not something we display. It is something we cultivate. The Bermensch teaches that the future belongs not to those who fear change, but to those who embrace the creative possibilities hidden within it. Living toward the Berman stew, live toward the Berman stew is to embrace responsibility for the meaning of one's life, overcome fear. Resentment and nihilism create values that reflect one's deepest nature. Affirm life fully. With its pains and joys, strive for continual growth rather than perfection. See oneself as a creator, not a follower by striving in this direction. Individuals cultivate inner authority, a sense of groundedness that external circumstances cannot easily shake. They become capable of navigating uncertainty with resilience. They become sources of inspiration rather than echoes of the crowd. Nietzsche believed that individuals who take this path become bridges between what humanity is and what it can be. They are the forerunners of a future in which individuals live with purpose, rooted not in tradition, but in personal creation. The end of the journey is the beginning with the idea of the Bermensch. Nietzsche closes one chapter and opens another. After diagnosing nihilism, after calling for revaluation, after revealing the will to power, after guiding us through self-overcoming and value creation, he leaves us with an image of the future, a human being who is strong enough to give meaning to existence, courageous enough to live without guarantees, and creative enough to shape reality according to inner vision. This final concept is not a conclusion, but a new beginning. It is the point at which Nietzsche hands the responsibility back to the individual. It is an invitation to live consciously, courageously, and creatively, to look at life not as something predetermined, but as something open to transformation. The Bermensch is not an external goal to reach, but an internal horizon to grow toward. And in this growth, Nietzsche believed humanity finds its deepest strength.